Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful, harmful gatekeeping, how social work licensing exams are hurting DC's communities. I wanna thank our host this evening, National Catholic School of Social Service, Catholic Charities of Archdiocese of Washington, Pathways to Housing, DC, Everyone Home, DC, in the MedStar Georgetown Center for Wellbeing in School Environment. I want to welcome everyone to this amazing discussion. The planners of this event are a diverse group of folks that are involved in the social work field. They are agency supervisors, social work educators, and deeply concerned about the impact of social work and social work exam on our colleagues, our workforce, and the DC community. The hope is that this discussion this evening will offer multiple perspectives that helps all of you gain some understanding of why the current policy proposal in DC is so important. We also want to make sure that we relate all of the feedback.
Marie, you just muted.
You're muted.
For the DC community and for the workforce. We will start by hearing from each of the panelists, and then we are going to have the pleasure to wrap up with Councilmember White, who will share the summary of the proposed legislation. Finally, we will allow for a 30 minutes Q&A so that we can have a diverse group of the community and the public voice to be heard. I want to go over the ground rules very quickly. And we are asking folks to please, if you are not speaking, to mute your buttons so that we can make sure that everyone is heard. We are also asking folks to write your questions on the chat so that we are able to capture some of those questions and answer them for you. We will allow 30 minutes for question and answers so that we can have an opportunity to hear the panelists. Different opinions and perspectives are very welcome. And we are asking folks to be respectful of the panelists and other attendees. Please, we are asking folks to be respectful. If you are disrespectful, insulting, or hostile, because I know this is a passionate issue, that we will be dismissed from the event. So I know we're not going to have that problem here. And we want to say welcome. We are looking forward to this robust discussion. And this session is being recorded. The agenda for tonight is we are looking at the exam data overview. We will look at the background of this issue, including exam bias and validity. We will look at the impact of the exam on social workers, on agency, and the workforce shortage that is providing for our community. We will take a dive into the DC policy. And finally, as mentioned earlier, we will have a discussion and answer. I am going to start with our two first panelists who are went over the ground rules. This is the slides that will share that. I am going to send it to Michael Macy, who is a social work professor for Catholic Charities, and Kimberly Sims, who is the coordinator, launch program, MedStar Georgetown University Hospital Department of Psychiatry. Michael.
Thank you very much, Marie. Before I get started, I just want to make sure that we have our, that folks can see me and can see our ASL interpreter. So just we can put that in the chat to make sure that everyone is set up the way they need to be before we get going. Okay. All right, we only see Dave. Well, Dave is the most important one to see, so that's okay. So I'll get going. If we want to try to get me up there, that would be great as well. So again, my name is Mike Massey, and I'm a professor of social work at Catholic University, though I do not speak for my school. One reason that we're offering this session is because Councilmember White introduced new legislation in April that would do two things. One, end the exam requirement for licensure at the bachelor's and master's levels, and two, create a task force to recommend a new assessment for independent clinical practice. We want to provide clear information as to why this bill is so important for DC. So I'm going to first review the exam outcome data that was released in August, and then Kim and I will tag team to answer some common questions about the issue and provide important context in understanding why change is needed. So while the exam has been controversial from the moment it became firmly established 40 years ago, ASWB, the organization that creates, distributes, and profits from them, did not release any demographic outcome data until last August. And that data revealed really what we already knew. There are consistent and massive outcome disparities across states, schools, and levels of licensure. So here's some national data that shows eventual passing rates for clinical exams. You can see here there are huge racial and ethnic disparities, the biggest one between Black test takers and white test takers. 35 percentage points. That is enormous. We also see older test takers struggle relative to younger ones, and non-native English speakers pass less often than native English speakers. Additionally, we know that other groups are struggling, like the deaf and hard of hearing community, but ASWB refuses to release data that gives us a more comprehensive understanding about what is going on, and that is a pattern for them. And here's national data for master's exams, eventual passing rates. And you can see very similar disparities across these categories. Now we're looking at racial and ethnic group national first-time pass rates for clinical and master's exams. You can see the disparities are even larger and more concerning, and first-time pass rates are very important, which we'll discuss in a second. And finally, here are Washington, DC first-time pass rates by race and ethnicity. And you can see here the rates are slightly different, but the disparities are still outrageously high. So why is this important? Well, there are lots of reasons, but here are some of the major, very clear impacts. First, there's abundant evidence of the psychological and professional harm that this is causing for social workers of color and other impacted populations. These are generally qualified people who are ready to go to work that are having to spend thousands of dollars to take and retake exams and pay for test prep. So even those that eventually pass the exams are delayed in their ability to enter the profession and advance in their careers. And this impacts hundreds to thousands of people with social work degrees, and we know it's contributing to the worker shortage in DC. And lastly, and very importantly, it hurts DC communities because they are deprived of a truly diverse and robust social work workforce, and in particular, marginalized communities are denied representation in the field. So that's a brief summary of the issue at hand, and now Kim Sims will provide some historical context to help us deepen our understanding of what's happening. Then I'll come back and address some common concerns and questions. So Kim?
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Kim Sims. I'm a licensed graduate social worker here in the District of Columbia. I work for the Georgetown Department of Psychiatry. I do not speak for them. I'm here for myself. And so I just graduated a couple of years ago. Before that, I had a previous career as a historian. So I'm wearing my historian hat and my social work hat today to just give you a really brief history of standardized testing and why the project of standardized testing is inherently a racist project. So the exam, those rates that we see, means that the exam is working as designed. So let me explain what I mean by that. Many of us, and I include myself in this group, grew up viewing standardized tests like the SAT, for example, as things that we must succeed at to prove our intelligence, our diligence, our worth. We live in a culture that demands we demonstrate our merit, show that we're deserving of a living wage, of a quality education, of a professional title through test scores. So supporters of standardized tests argue that they're neutral, objective, and fair ways to measure talent and competence. But if you know the history of standardized testing, why it exists in the form it does, and how it has been and is currently used, you will see this view must be challenged. So the notion that there should be tests, sets of questions, puzzles, structured activities that permit people in power to definitively assess the intellectual, physical, or vocational capacities of the less powerful was popularized in the United States in the early 20th century by a collection of racist thinkers. They were associated with the sciences. So French psychologist Alfred Binet and English statisticians Carl Pearson and Ronald Fisher, these are some people that were extremely influential in creating modern statistics and in popularizing the idea of standardized testing measures. So these guys were all eugenicists. So if any of you have heard of the term eugenics before, this is a belief. It was extremely popular in the early 20th century. And some of you may have heard this term associated with the Nazis. The Nazis were eugenicists. And this is the belief that people are born either of good stock or they come into the world as subnormal, defective, or feeble-minded. So eugenicists relied on ableist and racist thought to rank human beings. They developed a variety of testing protocols to prove that their ideas were true. Ernest Greenwood, who was the vice president of the Board of Education in DC in 1920, described the perceived necessity of standardized tests as, when he said, and I quote, "The anthropologists are turning out endless statistics to prove that the standard of American intelligence is declining, and the biologists tell us why, but they must have some method of racial grading to substantiate their claims." So it was this very, very clear statement that we need a test to prove that some people are inferior, racially inferior, and some are superior. So these tests were soon used in schools, jails, by government officials and corporations to determine who was disposable, who was useful, and who deserved access to opportunity. So some examples of how standardized testing was used. At Ellis Island, immigrants were asked to recite the days of the week backwards and stack blocks, among other things, so officials could decide whether they could stay in the country or be deported. And Binet, who was French, used tests to assign a mental age to school children to identify which were defective, and those tests were adapted for use in the US by Stanford University psychologist Lewis Terman, who was developer of something you may have all heard of, the IQ test, the intelligence quotient test, which is still used today and is explicitly a eugenicist tool. So here are some images. These are some historic charts. One of these is from a study done by Terman, and he looked at people who were in the US Army during the First World War. And so the chart that you see that says occupations on the top, and down at the bottom you see D, C, B, and A. Those were the values given to different people of different intelligence. So here you see there's an attempt to say laborers are at the bottom. These are the least intelligent people. And at the top, we have, officers. So this is, a thing, we need to give people tests to see what kind of work they should be allowed to do, what work they can do, whether or not they can work. So these tests, going way back to the early 20th century, had this, was idea that it was associated with professions, with work. And this is how we're seeing the LGSW test used today. On the other side, we have a very typical eugenics ranking of, national origin and intelligence. So you'll see at the bottom, you see the same, dark D is the least intelligent, and the lighter box is the most intelligent. And you see England on the top and Negro on the bottom. And these, again, is from the Army, which is why it says Negro draft. So just an illustration of that for you. So just quickly, I will say that, the standard, this idea that there should be a standard or uniform method of testing, this was a key and powerful feature of eugenicist thought. So this lent testing credibility in certain circles, the sense that everybody's being tested on the same thing. And then we see how everything falls out. This means that, those results are really important, but the test itself doesn't get examined. Whose interests do the tests represent? And standardization also allows people in power the control over what the standard is. And it gives people with the resources to create the standard to decide what's objective, right? So resources, for example, paying a lot of people to do research and generate questions. Not everybody can do that. Only really powerful entities have the money to create the standard for testing. So these charts are over 100 years old. It may seem to you that these things must have been much different in the 1980s and the 70s, when it was decided that social workers should have to take a standardized test for licensure. But I will tell you that that is not the case. So basically what happened is that after World War II, it became much less fashionable to associate yourself with Nazis. So people stopped using this very explicit racist language. And they talked instead about aptitude, achievement, merit, but we still had these standardized tests and they still had the same function. And then you had the government pouring money into schools to promote the use of standardized tests in schools. So it became more widespread and it became this huge business, this huge industry, and it's continued to be used in professional circles, like in social work. And at the time, in the 70s and 80s, as these tests were getting more popular, lots of people protested. They said, this is racist, this is bad, don't do this. So I think we can certainly, conclude that people who decided that this test should be tied to social work licensure knew about these critiques and went forward anyway. So to conclude, I want to briefly talk about and bring the other context in that I think is really important today, which is talk about Black social work in DC and its history. So, in the program that I went to, the MSW program, we didn't really talk about Black social workers in a historical context. We talked about Black clients. We talked about how to serve Black communities, but we didn't talk about the important role that professional social workers played, that Black people played as professional social workers, we have created social work practice. We have been an integral part of it. And so when you have a test that excludes Black social workers, there's something wrong with the test. Black people in DC have been practicing social work for over 100 years, and this test was put in place in the 1980s. So I'm going to pass it back along to Mike to wrap up.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. And I'm going to kind of build off of her really important history and address some of the common questions and concerns that are coming up around this issue today. So one question that comes up quite a bit is that people wonder if when we say we want to eliminate exams, are we saying that social workers should not be licensed? And the answer very plainly is no. We can have licensure requirements and already do, that don't include exams at all. Aside from exams, social workers are already required to get a social work degree from an accredited institution, accumulate thousands of hours of supervised practice, meet continuing education requirements. It's already a high bar that ensures a strong baseline of training and supervision. Exams have not always been part of licensure, and they don't always need to be part of licensure. Perhaps the biggest issue to address, though, is the notion that these exams serves to, quote, protect the public. It's language you hear a lot, and here's the problem. Based on the evidence, the only thing we can say for certain is that the exams protect the public from a diverse and competent workforce. What we know for sure is these exams are inequity and stratification machines. They enable the vast majority of younger, native English-speaking white social workers to be licensed and advanced in the field, while thousands of people of color, older folks, and non-native speakers are left to take and retake and stagnate in the field, even abandon the profession altogether. And that is a fact that is in this data. What ASWB says is their exams are a defensible measure of social work competence, which means they believe that the racial and other disparities are accurate representations of the competence of social workers. So they're saying that white people are more competent than people of color. Younger people are more competent than older folks. Native English speakers are more competent than non-native English speakers. But if you're defending those exams that keep certain populations out of the profession in wildly disproportionate ways and deprive communities of social workers who share their identities and experiences, you better demonstrate without a shadow of a doubt that those exams do exactly what you say they do. And we're asked to engage in evidence-based practice, right? And so the question is, what's the evidence that licensing exams measure social work competence or have any relationship to safe and ethical practice? And so in the next slide, I'm going to show you what that evidence is. And there it is. There isn't any. And I've tried hard to find it for years. In the 40 years that exams have been a regular part of licensure, nobody has produced any research or evidence that the exams protect anyone. They simply want you to believe it's true, and that is not acceptable. So we can either trust those empty claims and accept racial and other discrimination, or we can say enough is enough. And in fact, there's much more evidence over decades that the exams lack validity and are biased. In other words, they're not objective, nor are they a legitimate standard of competence. And here are a few examples, and the links to these articles will be posted in the chat. So finally, there are some that would argue that the current DC bill is too risky and won't address the workforce shortage. But this is simply and plainly not true. We have a recent case example in Illinois that offers clear evidence. In 2021, they passed a bill that eliminated the bachelor's and master's levels exams. Since then, they've seen a massive increase in licensed social workers, almost 3 times the number they had the year prior to the law. We look in DC, if everyone passed at the same rate as white test takers over the last 10 years, we would have almost 500 more licensed social workers. That's a huge difference, and that's just the kind of racial disparities. And by the way, since the bill passed in Illinois, they've seen no notable increase in harm to the public or complaints to the social work board. It's been so successful, they just passed a bill that provides an alternate pathway to clinical licensure. California hasn't used the exam at the bachelor's and master's level for years with no ill effects. So these examples make it clear that there's no need to wait, and we can do this right now safely and effectively, and we have a policy that can do it. And so I hope that Kim and I provided some helpful context for you, but perhaps more importantly, we want to hear from folks directly impacted in a variety of ways. And so that's what we'll do in the remaining presentation time. So Marie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and to Kim, Michael, and to Kim for this amazing presentation and for setting the foundation for this discussion. Now I am turning it over to Christy Love, who is an MSW and president of the Association of Black Social Workers in Metro DC chapter and employment and adult education team coordinator for Community of Hope. Christy, Love, I'm sending it to you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Like she said, I'm Christy Love, President of the Association of Black Social Workers, Metro DC chapter. In America today, no Black person, except the selfish or irrational, can claim neutrality in the quest for Black liberation, nor fail to consider the implications of the events taking place in our society. On behalf of NABSW, the National Association of Black Social Workers, know that I regard as my primary obligation the welfare of the Black individual, Black family, and Black community, and will engage in action for improving social conditions. I give precedence to this mission over my personal interests. This evening, I speak in support of Robert White's bill, Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act of 2023. We hope tonight that you understand we are not advocating to end licensure. We are advocating for equity, which keeps social workers, majority Black social workers, which keeps social workers from making a living and advocating in this profession. I've taken the exam, the prep classes, the exams, and more prep classes. Yet I'm still not licensed. And yes, that has affected me. It has kept me from some professional opportunities, but I know that I am a competent social worker who has served DC residents since 2007. I am grateful for Community of Hope, our CEO, Kelly Machine, and others within Community of Hope who support this bill and have advocated for changes as it pertains to requirements for certain positions. Like Ms. Maria said, I am a team coordinator that manages individuals. Don't worry, it's not a clinical position. The point is, there was an opportunity for me to lead and grow in my profession. If we read to understand the bill, you will see that it advocates for eliminating a barrier. We work with individuals on a daily basis who have several barriers. Our goal as social workers is to decrease the number of barriers for individuals so they can move closer to self-determination and live the life they desire. How do we not want the same for us as professionals? As Black people, we cannot move in an individualistic world. We are community. Even if we don't believe in all the same things, we should practice living out the Nguzo Saba principles with great attention to unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, and creativity. This profession is not a cookie cutter profession, yet we refuse to be creative in how one can reach the clinical level. We improvise in ethical ways and meet people where they are. For NABSW, we adopt the concept of a Black extended family and embrace all Black people as our brothers and sisters, making no distinction between their destiny and our own. Now, because we need evidence to prove points, let's talk about the numbers that Mike shared, but let's also be clear, like most topics and issues, we are at the bottom. So I'm just going to share again what he was saying. For the master's level exam, almost 2,000 people sat for the exam for the first time. Out of that number, 844 were Black, and only 55% passed the first time, in comparison to 86% for multiracial, 70% for Hispanics, and 98% for white folks. For the clinical exam, a little over 1,600 folks sat for the exam for the first time. 672 were Black. Only 52% passed, compared to the 86% for multiracial and 93% for white people. How is that not alarming? Some will take it again and again and again and eventually pass, but how has that affected them emotionally, financially, and professionally? We can talk about competency, but that's another conversation for another day, still relating to the topic. Of course, we can argue there are licensed and unlicensed folks who are not competent, which further shows that just because you pass the test does not automatically prove you're capable of serving people. Therefore, to ensure the missions of both NABSW and ASWB, we respectively demand the following. Additional data be released to include the differentiation and scoring process data. Alternative pathways, which Mike talked about in other states to licensure, are implemented, including modular testing and conditioning for the exam. ASWB to document support to state social work license board of passage of those who failed by 10 points or less. ASWB to contract with professional social work organizations and practitioners to provide culturally appropriate test-taking classes, and ASWB to provide free test taking for those who have failed 3 or more times. That's all I have, and thank you for your time. But I did want to say really quick, I have to put in a plug. Join us Friday, June 16th at Howard University School of Social Work. We're having our local conference, and the theme is Strengthening and Building the Village, Umoja and Ujima in Full Effect. And it will offer up to 6 CEUs, and we'll be joined by a host of Black licensed social work practitioners. If interested, you can follow us, or you can find me on ABSW Metro DC Chapter.org or on Instagram at ABSW Metro DC. Thank you all.
Thank you, Christy. You can put that information on the chat for everyone to see. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Our next panelist, thank you, everyone. I see the comments are coming feverishly on the chat. Keep them coming. We're gonna keep track of them and try to address them during the Q&A. Our next panelist is Conchetta Pucci. She is a BSW Field Program Assistant and faculty at the Social Work Department at Gallaudet University. Conchetta.
Hi. Okay, really, gosh, it has been a very long journey for me coming to the point where I am now. First of all, just briefly, I'm involved in the deaf community in Washington, D.C. And first of all, my master's is, your image is freezing. Go slower or something. Connection's bad. Try again. You say my degree. Say again. Yeah. On and off. Just start again from my degree, you said. Oh, we're having an image freezing problem. Let's try, let's see. I graduated University of Maryland. That was back at that point. I took the exam myself in New York State. Basically, that was clinical license at the grad level. And I took that actually 5 times, and I kept failing again and again. It was just by 1, 2, 3, or 4 points, just barely missing it, and I was spending so much money to get into it. Talk about the emotional stress, the mental health impact on me was just, oh my gosh, it just didn't feel right at all. It was like, gosh, did I choose the right field to be in social work? But I decided to drop it and, maybe make it a different field. And then I ultimately transferred to Gallaudet University and kept going. Now, 10 years later, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, you know what? I really want to pass this damn test. I just must do it. So I was thinking whatever it takes. So I decided to try one more time. I studied like crazy. I mean, I was sweating and everything, and I passed it. I made it the first time, after taking it and failing so many. I was trying to figure out what the heck went on. Well, the way that I did it differently, actually, between DC and New York was different. It's not fair that it's not the same.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that. New York, when I looked at this, basically they did allow an interpreter, but only to monitor for the instructor. That's it. 2 hours for the exam. That's it. Nothing else. DC was different. DC allowed an interpreter for the instructor, plus to help me to understand, to basically translate from English, which is not my native language, to sign. I still felt kind of, unclear about certain things. And I was able, through the interpreter's assistance, to understand clearly as far as what's going on. See, sign is entirely different. It is not English. So my first language, I obviously understand through my native tongue, which is American Sign Language. So, I mean, I had to add 4 hours additional to actually get through the test to really understand it clearly. There's something that really wrong by that. In DC, another thing just to explain, in the DC area, DC has about 20,000 deaf people that are residents. All right, about 20,000 roughly. Now, bear in mind that as of I know, just off the top of my head, I could say maybe 15 deaf or so licensed clinical social workers, about 20,000, and only 15 to represent them. If you compare, maybe 10 people can understand and sign, But do they provide help directly with the deaf clients? That's a very tiny percent, like 0.001. That is certainly not enough resources by any means. Talk about being scarce in the deaf community in DC. What's going on? Talk about a disparity. Now, the deaf clients, when they get therapy and services and stuff, if they have the access to direct communication through an interpreter, oftentimes it involves stress, and really there's some mental grief. There's additional responsibility just to make sure that the interpreter understands them. If there is, good connection between us and so forth. So this actually adds to, it's not easy for us in order to be able to deal with that. So I'm thinking the dynamics here, my goodness, not enough resources, as I said, so many deaf people, not enough deaf people to serve them. And so for this clinical license, now I had left 50 hours about that. And I realized that I had already started the application process, filling out for the DC board. Oh my goodness. I have to tell you what, I mean, I was dreading this. I mean, literally step by step by step, I had to go through this. I mean, 15 different items that I had to check off this list to understand. And I had this checklist. Once that was completed, then I had to request to see if I could match information. Talk about taking additional time. Once again, I had to request that I could do this paperwork and continue step by step by step, and then submit it step by step. It just took forever and a day to get through this. It's not supposed to have to make you go through so much like this. It's supposed to be a smooth process, I would think. I mean, it's not all the way it should be. That's just what I'm saying. That's my point. I just had to think, talk about resources limited and the process involved, the test itself being inequitable between the different locations. We have to think about who wrote the exam. Is it a group of people like us? No, I suspect it was most all hearing people that wrote the exam. I don't know this to be a fact. In fact, and I don't know of any deaf people that even had their say in what goes in. I mean, maybe some of you know that, but in my 20 years in this profession, I have never met any deaf person that was involved. We need more representation from diverse people. This way we can match language with the people that, the group of us, basically. Also, second language learners. It shouldn't be based just upon those that are English as a first language type people in the deaf community, for certain. I cherish them. I mean, it's a very large deaf community, a large deaf populace, probably the largest in the United States. Many times, I mean, if you think about it, people all need mental health support. And so we really need to improve this system. So that's in a nutshell. I tried to keep it short and sweet. If we have any questions, we'll hold that till the end. Okay. Thanks so much. Bye now.
Thank you, Dr. Pucci. Thank you. Our next panelist is Bianca Andrews. She is Compass Program Advocacy and Resource Manager for Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington. I'm turning it over to Ms. Andrews.
Hello, everyone. And again, my name is Bianca Andrews. I am a licensed graduate social worker in DC. And again, I am the Advocacy and Resource Manager for the Compass Program at Catholic Charities. And as many of my colleagues have pointed out, we are not advocating for ending licensure. However, there is an undeniable racial bias that prevents social workers of color from passing the licensure exam and becoming licensed social workers. Let me also say, I genuinely understand the concerns of my fellow social work colleagues who may worry that social workers of color or otherwise who do not pass the exam may be less equipped than those who have passed. However, I firmly believe that we must challenge this notion and highlight the fact that there is simply no evidence to support this claim. In fact, we have more tangible examples that point toward the opposite. Many of us, including myself, have witnessed firsthand that some of our own colleagues and classmates who have and are currently struggling to pass these licensure exams have also dedicated years as case managers, social work interns, and even program builders for these same organizations. They have engaged in direct client interaction and have built invaluable skills through hands-on work in the field. And in my own case, I learned much of the clinical aspects and terminologies of our profession as somebody who came in very macro focused into this background from colleagues who then struggled to pass the licensure exam, even though I did not. In fact, I have also witnessed that when these exams prevent these particular colleagues and classmates from fully transitioning into our profession, it denies the most vulnerable clients access to highly skilled, competent, and culturally sensitive social workers with the lived experiences needed to provide the best care. As a profession committed to fighting against social injustice, how can we ignore the role that we play in perpetuating systemic racism and the quality of care received in underserved, underprivileged, and largely concentrated communities of color? It is our responsibility to look inward, to examine the systems that we have and continue to keep in place, and to question the validity and fairness of these exams. This starts with acknowledging that the current form of racially rooted testing perpetuates injustice. I would even argue that we already have alternative ways that are better equipped to assess the competence and ability of these young social workers to thrive in our profession. The rigorous practices and learning objectives that are gained from direct client interaction, field supervision, field placement within the academy are far more effective indicators of a young social worker's potential for success. These experiences also foster cultural competency and a deep understanding of clients' needs, providing a solid foundation for effective interventions and opportunities for professional evaluation in areas of growth. It is also our job to come together, to hear one another, and to take collective action in dismantling these racial biases within our licensure exams and the broader social work system. So here, your fellow social work colleague who jumped through your hoops, who passed your exams because it was what was necessary to ensure that effective services reached my people. When I say that this exam is hurting our colleagues, it's hurting our clients, and it's hurting our profession. Also hear me when I say that we are accountable for fostering a profession that reflects the diversity of the communities we serve, that prioritizes cultural sensitivity, and that provides equitable care for all. And by doing so, that is when we fulfill our commitment to social justice and ensure that a brighter, more inclusive future can even exist for social workers. So that is what I want all of you to keep in mind when you think about your coworkers or your colleagues who say this exam is racist. It has racial implications. And if we continue to do nothing, we are complicit in that racism. And that's all I would like to say.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. Thank you, Bianca Andrews, for those eloquent remarks. This has been a great and robust discussion thus far, and we are going to keep it going with our next panelist, my dear friend, Christy Repress. She is the president and CEO of Pathway to Housing DC. Christy,
thank you, Marie. Thank you. And I'm really honored to be on the panel with all these incredible folks. I'm bringing the perspective of a provider of services in the district. So Pathways to Housing DC, our mission is to end homelessness for people with psychiatric and other disabilities using the Housing First model that Pathways developed in New York about 30 years ago. We opened our doors in 2004, and we serve about 3,500 people each year in both DC and Montgomery County. So Pathways, we provide a really wide range of services from street homeless outreach to supportive housing. And our workforce, as you can imagine, to do this work is comprised of a mix of bachelor's and master's level staff. They have degrees in social work, counseling, human services, psychology, and other helping professions. But also, we hire many people with lived experience of the various issues that we seek to address, like homelessness, incarceration, mental illness, substance use. So I have been working as a social worker to end homelessness since the late 1990s. And when I graduated with my master's in social work almost 25 years ago from Howard, a license wasn't actually required to provide non-therapy, so not direct therapy, but direct mental health support in the supportive housing services programs where I worked, in the state that I worked. Fast forward today, I actually believe that ensuring that anyone graduating with a social work degree and doing direct service really should be licensed. It's also been my direct experience, though, that the current ASWB exam does not reflect whether a social worker is qualified to do the work for all the reasons that these incredibly amazing social workers before me have just discussed. So the issue of licensure and this specific issue about this racist test has directly impacted our ability to expand our programs and services to meet the needs of our communities. You know, one of our commitments at Pathways, and I imagine at every organization represented here, is our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and doing everything that we can to have a workforce at every level, not just frontline staff, but frontline staff, managers, supervisors, reflecting the communities we serve. And in Washington, D.C., about 90% of the people we serve identify as Black, and approximately 85 also are over the age of 50. So it's critical that our staff reflect this diversity as well. The current requirement of the social work licensing exam, though, has a really clear negative impact on our ability to achieve this very goal. So as an example, last year, Pathways had to terminate three master's level social workers who've been working at Pathways for a number of years. Two of them identified as Black, one as Asian. All three were providing incredible supportive services, really high quality in one of our Housing First programs. They work with people who are experiencing homelessness to help them move into housing and then help them achieve their personal goals around family connection, healthcare, employment, mental health and substance use treatment, obtaining benefits, all the things people need to live a fulfilled and self-empowered life. They were dedicated, they provided high quality services, and we were really confident they could grow in leadership if given the chance. But unfortunately, that wasn't possible given the current requirements to pass the ASWB exam. What's even more deeply disturbing is that the same jobs they were doing were also being done by staff with other degrees like psychology, human services, divinity, or even anthropology, which don't require passing a licensing exam to provide supportive case management. They had the experience, but they weren't social workers. Because these three staff had a master's in social work, though, they became unemployed, unable to do a work in the field that they were committed to, and it impacted their livelihood. It's not okay just to say, well, they could get another job. They committed their lives and their resources, investing tens of thousands of dollars to getting a degree, and they weren't able to work. But it doesn't just impact our current staff. One of our program managers started tracking the number of applications we receive from applicants who have social work degrees but no licenses. Over the last few years, and this is a way undercount because one manager, Pathways has had at least 50 applicants that we couldn't even interview because they had social work degrees but aren't licensed. Many of them had experience in social services at other programs. We would hire them on the spot if they didn't have social work degrees, but we couldn't risk the sanctions from the social work board by hiring them. We believe that the lack of licensure was a combination of not passing exams and also some people just not knowing that licensure is required. So I know there's a lot of fear that dropping the exam requirement will bring unqualified social workers into the field and really water down the integrity that we've fought hard to achieve as a discipline. But Pathways believes that dropping the requirement for the exam is actually going to bring more qualified social workers into the field. You saw that slide earlier from Mike, and more supervision. Currently many agencies, including the DC government, hire social workers that aren't licensed to do work that's in DC's social work scope of practice. Bringing these staff under the oversight of the social work board allows the board to better respond to complaints from the community and actually provide more oversight than they currently have. We need qualified, committed social workers in the community to do this incredible life-saving work. Eliminating the requirement for the exam, but keeping the rest of the licensing process in place. I'm underscoring that, the rest of the licensing requirements in place, graduation from an accredited university, background checks, ongoing CEUs, et cetera. Putting those in place, but dropping the exam or eliminating the requirement for the exam actually ensures that we have a better chance of having the qualified workforce in place to tackle our most pressing social needs. So I really hope that we can lead the way in the region to changing these racist practices and dropping this exam. And I really want to thank Councilmember White for introducing the legislation that brings us closer to this goal and for investing in social workers at the new program at UDC. If we have that program and only 55% of those folks are able to pass the licensing exam, that is not an okay investment. We know the exam does not reflect the quality of the work that our staff are doing. So I'll stop there, and I just want to thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Christy. I hope you all are monitoring the chat because there are robust discussion and comments in the chat, as well as some resources of free CEUs and other informational links that will present you to other materials that after this presentation you can take a look at so you can become even more informed. I am now welcoming Councilman Robert White. We are so excited that you are here to join us, and we are even more excited for your leadership in introducing this bill. So I am going to turn it over to you, Councilman White, to share with this wonderful audience the summary of the bill and some of what you are proposing.
Thanks so much, Marie. I'm really glad to be here and to be with an incredible array of panelists. Let me start by expressing my deep respect for this profession. I know there are a lot of views on the exam and a lot of views from people in the profession. I am not in the profession, and so I want to make sure it's always clear how much I respect and appreciate folks who are in this critical field. So the bill I introduced, the Social Work License Modernization Amendment Act, which was co-introduced by 9 of my colleagues, so 10 of the 13 council members on the DC Council introduced this together. It amends the Health Occupations Revision Act to end the exam requirements for licensure for licensed social work associates, LSWAs, and licensed graduate social workers, LGSWs. It creates a task force to develop recommendations for a new assessment method at the clinical levels of licensure. So for the licensed independent clinical social worker and licensed clinical social worker, and provide a report to the council on their findings. So on the first 2 levels, we would get rid of the exam. On the clinical levels, we would revise the exam, which I think is long overdue. The idea for this bill was brought to my office by a group of social workers and organizations that hire social workers, including Pathways to Housing. And I've heard concerns that there was no public forum for input prior to the bill being introduced. I understand this concern. We don't usually have public hearings before a bill is introduced, but as the bill works its way through the legislative process, part of the required process, it is a public forum in the way of a public hearing. And I encourage everyone who's interested in this issue, whatever side you're on, to please testify. We don't have a date for the hearing yet. The Health Committee, chaired by Councilmember Christina Henderson, is working to schedule one. Once a date is set, I will publicize it and make sure it is sent to all channels that this information for this event was sent to as well. I also know that public forums have been held on the exam itself with the Board of Social Work and Association of Social Work Boards. Why this is important, I think, was covered incredibly well by my previous panelists, but for why this matters for the District of Columbia, particularly the District of Columbia government, and why we have a stake in this. One really important example is in the issue of housing, permanent supportive housing vouchers. We have a backlog, so we have a lot of, unfortunately, people experiencing homelessness in the District of Columbia. We also have, wonderfully, funded a lot of housing vouchers. The bad news is that there is a huge backlog. So people are being approved for a voucher, but they are still living out on the street for years as they wait to get through the process. There are a few places where this process is bottlenecking. One of the biggest is connecting with social workers because we just don't have enough folks in these positions. We also, across the district, across the country, across the world, need more access to mental health care. So it is so important for the district government, for the safety, the health, and well-being of people in the district, that we expand the number of people in this important profession. We need diversity in the workforce. We need people with cultural competency. We need people with different lived experiences, the types of people who the data show are being excluded from the profession by way of this exam. So in ensuring access to a respected profession for Black residents, older residents, residents for whom English is not their first language, and for deaf and hard of hearing residents, this is incredibly important to the city and to the nation. I want to clarify something. The bill will not get rid of licensure for social workers at every level, only for the LSW and LGSW levels. There are already people, as I think one of my fellow panelists said earlier, there are already people in the district who have not taken the exam, who are licensed social workers because they were grandfathered in. And yes, now they have many years of experience, but they all started in the exact same place as social workers coming out of their degree programs today. So there is significant precedent for this in the district, not to mention the states that have gotten rid of the exam. In the district, like many other places, maybe every other place, there's a workforce shortage in the social work field. The exam is not the only cause for this shortage, but it is one piece of it. It's estimated, Michael shared this earlier, that DC would have an additional 474 people with social work licenses if we pass this bill. And I know that many of you here this evening work for organizations that are short-staffed, or you have high caseloads that make serving your clients the way you want to challenging. And having these additional social workers would help ease the load and allow us to serve more people and serve them better. Reducing caseloads also has the potential to make residents safer by ensuring that social workers are able to give the time and attention they need to every client, where so many today are stretched thin. We have to challenge a test that has no correlation with safety or competence, but has veto power over years of education and hundreds of hours of training. One thing that's important that I think most people, if you work in this profession, in this event this evening realize, but the average layperson may not realize, is that Kier, I'm going to need you to mute. Thank you. That folks on the levels for which we would get rid of the exam have to be overseen by licensed social workers. These are folks who have put in years into training, hundreds of hours of training. And so we believe that this is a very important step for the district, for the nation. I will continue to work to understand the concerns of people who oppose the bill. I've heard many of the arguments. I understand them, even if I don't agree with most of them. But I look forward to having more of those conversations because I want to understand every aspect of this. But very importantly, I want to make sure in the District of Columbia, we are serving as many people as we can. We are serving them as well as we can, and that we are taking conscious, competent steps to diversify the social work field in a way that the data show we are prohibiting diversity now. So again, I appreciate you letting me be a part of this conversation. Very honored to be the author of the bill, and want to thank the many social workers and folks who helped us craft this bill. So thanks again.
Thank you, Councilman White. Thank you to all of the panelists that have spoken thus far. And we are moving to the question and answer period of our discussion. I just wanted to have a few friendly reminders. As you know, we have over 119 people in this discussion. It's a large group, very impressive. And this is a passionate discussion. So what we are asking is for people to raise their hand or put their question in the chat. Please do not unmute until I call on you. Please keep your question brief. We will try to keep answers also brief. We're asking folks to keep their answers to a minute, no longer than a minute and a half. so we can get through as many questions as possible, because we want the public voice and a diverse voice to be heard. If you disagree, please disagree without being disagreeable. We want to have a respectful discussion and value each other's experience and perspective. And as your facilitator, I am going to make sure we hear from both sides, so that if I'm hearing from one side, I will ask if someone has an opposing view and ask for the other side, so we can have a balanced discussion. And finally, if you've spoken once, I may not call on you again until some new voice has been heard. And so based on these final rules, we are going to start with Patricia Quinn.
Thank you
Patricia.
so much, Marie. It came up in the chat. How does this impact the ability to bill insurers? Is there any impact that has to be considered within the legislation to ensure that insurers will pay for social workers who aren't licensed, who are licensed without an exam?
Great question, Patricia. The legislation does not address that. I would look at the payment in states that don't require licensures for guidance on there, and see if that required any form of legislation. So I doubt that is something we'll have to add, but if we do need to add it, we will do that after the public hearing.
Thank you.
I can add something to that as well. It's a good question, and I've done a lot of digging around that. If you look at any sort of insurance billing policies, the language is all about licensure. And remember, we're not dealing with licensure here. We're just taking away a certain requirement for licensure at various levels. So there's no language about having to pass an exam or not. It's up to DC or the various states to decide who gets licensed and who doesn't. Once they confer the license, that's what the billing is based on. And we've seen no evidence to the contrary, as Councilmember White was referring to, in any other places that have done similar things. So I think it's a thing that people have worried about. I think reasonably so, but I think we can not worry about that. It seems very clear that reimbursement will remain quite the same.
I might recommend a one-page or a brief that just sort of spells that out, so that you can just stop that line of inquiry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. We have iPhone. Let me see if it'll tell me the number. There's no name.
Yeah, maybe just move on.
I'm going to move to Nicole Lawrence. Nicole?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for selecting me, Dr. Black. I just want to say, I think this legislation is very well intended. However, I think the order is wrong. Prior to providing an intervention, you have to do an assessment. And it's not clear to me that an assessment, and when I say assessment, I'm referring to conversations, forums, questions, all of the above, and maybe some more, with the social work community, with the schools of social work, to understand what their perspective is on the challenge. Yes, the test is biased. Yes, it is racist. There are a lot of issues with it, but I just think that the order in which the steps are being taken are not correct. And I think you also have to look at a number of macro issues, such as what is in DC contracts. They're hiring for positions, what they say. And it was brought to my attention that the scope of social work is another issue that requires a lot of what we do is social work. So you require a license. But ask, is an LICSW what is required? And what are the what supports are being offered to require or to support people to pass the LG and the LICSW exam? I worked for CFSA. I came in unlicensed straight out of graduate school. My caseload and the work and what was expected of me did not support me being able to truly study to pass that exam. And so it took me 2 tries to pass the LG. I don't want to hog up my time. Thank you very much for selecting me. I have a number of questions and comments in the chat. Thank you, everyone.
And I'm sorry, just so everyone knows, I was the one who was iPhone. I changed my name on the chat.
Let me just thank Nicole for.
Go ahead, Ramon.
Okay.
Ramon, you have your question?
Yes, yes.
Marie,
my
can we
question-
respond to the first question, that last question before Ramon goes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michael.
All right, I think Councilmember White had started to respond.
Oh,
I appreciate. I'll be very brief. I just want to thank Nicole for the recommendation. If we could have hearings on issues before and after we introduce bills, we probably would do that. I logistically don't think that would be possible, but I also don't think a hearing before introducing a bill would reveal something different than what we will hear in the hearing after the bill is introduced. We're going to hear a divided constituency on this issue. I just don't think that we would get to consensus. I do take your point very seriously and mention one of the other things that I'm doing to try to increase the number of people in this field is that I introduced a bill and just got it funded to create a free MSW program at the University of the District of Columbia. This, I think, will also go toward helping more diverse communities get into the field. But of course, they have to pass the exam.
thank you, Councilman White. Any other panelists want to add? Okay. Ramon?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember White, for this presentation. So my question is, and I put it on the chat too, can any of you explain exactly how race and ethnicity is somehow involved in terms of bias when it comes to pass rates or fail rates? Because I mean, I hear the argument about the deaf culture and also maybe like non-English speaking, individuals. That's an accessibility issue, I think, but race and ethnicity are something separate. Is there a link? Is there some specific information that actually says that these tests are biased when it comes to race and ethnicity? I mean, if so, what is that data? Where does it come from? And one of my colleagues also posed the same question as to maybe something similar as to what specific questions maybe perhaps are there that are linked to bias when it comes to race and ethnicity.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll be very honest. When I think about this takes me back to, and I know a lot of us culturally don't or have not watched the show Good Times. But there was an episode in Good Times many moons ago in the 70s when Michael, poor righteous leader, had to take the standardized test at school. And the biggest issue that Michael had, and he was a very intelligent young man, for those who don't know, just a little backstory, and he was always prompted and revered as an upcoming lawyer. So Michael had to take this standardized test in this poor Chicago school. He lived in a poor Chicago ghetto. And what Michael talked about was the questions on the test, how the formulation of language, how the assumptions that everybody's experience and everybody's lived knowledge was the same, and it's not. Perspective and lived experience is so important, and it is not incorporated in the process of creating standardized tests. So what I might call a bedroom, somebody else might not call a bedroom. What I call a child sitting on her legs might not be the same reason that the test interprets why a child might sit on her legs. So while I cannot legally give specific examples from that test, what I can say is, like I said in the chats, if the tip from just about every professional that I've ever encountered is, I have to put aside who I am as a Black woman living in the District of Columbia and think like a white woman, then therein lies one of the greatest potential problems of the test. And I grappled with this all through social work school, because even the remedies for some of our social ills and our social problems, the way that they were addressed and talked about from some of our social work teachers and professors was a privilege. It was things that they could do and say that I cannot do and say. It was access that they had that I cannot have or I do not have. It was ways that they were taught and groomed to think about problem solving and even what a problem was that I'm not afforded that privilege.
Absolutely, Ms. Jones.
Thank
I appreciate your passion in answering that question. I am trying to get to some additional folks. I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Can I add to that before we go on for 1 second, please?
Go ahead, Michael.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'll be quick though. And that's hard to follow up because Good Times is, go back and watch it. A great show, one of my all-time favorites. And a really important points there. I would just give a couple examples. There's a recent article I put it in the chat that goes over prior test exam questions. ASWB doesn't allow us to access a lot of data. That's been their kind of MO for 40 years because they don't want people to find out the truth here. But we use prior exam questions that are in practice tests. These researchers found several examples of microaggressions embedded in the test questions. There's also a very recent research article that came out that used AI technology to look at the questions. And in several examples, the AI technology gave really well-reasoned rationales as to why the example that ASWB said was correct was not actually the correct answer. And that was because AI was actually considering context and nuance, which is what you're not allowed to consider in a lot of these questions. And so that is, that's some of the underlying issues that are part of this bias that has a lot of dimensions to it. So I hope that starts to help. And I can provide links to those things if you want.
I want to remind everyone that this presentation will be on YouTube. Give them a few days to get it to you. And then all of this wealth of resource, you'll be able to access it. Marisa Robinson, you're next, and then Lydia.
I don't think I've ever had someone pronounce my name right on the first try. Thank you. So I work with the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and one of the things that we encounter often is survivors of domestic violence who are trained in social work in their countries of origin who want to practice here, which would really increase our cultural competency, right? People who speak the language, serving the communities who speak their language. And what they run into is they are not able to practice here, partially because of this exam that's just not accessible to them. So how does the district currently handle foreign qualifications for people who want to practice social work here? And how would passing this proposal, how would that increase their access to serving their own communities?
Marisa, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that offhand. Maybe one of our practitioners knows.
Any of our panelists want to take a shot at answering that question? I think that's an excellent question. I think there lies one of the challenges, Marissa, and that's one of the reasons this bill will be extremely helpful in addressing some of these issues. And that's one of the reasons Councilman White in the bill shared that they want to have an assessment done to really look at options that will enhance the diversity of our workforce.
And
Anyone?
I'll just add that you do need, under the, if the exams are taken away at bachelor's and master's level, you still need a degree at an accredited institution here. So that would still be something that everyone needs. But if they did have that, it would definitely allow folks and people who are non-native English speakers, we can see they struggle with this, and ASWB doesn't allow, doesn't give any other test other than in English. And so we are seeing this shortage of folks that speak the language of the people they're serving, and that's partially happening because of these exams.
Thank you so much.
Lydia?
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. I'll be brief, but a brief intro first. I am actually a student. I am currently getting my MSW. I've just finished my first year. So I haven't taken the exam yet, or I've only begun to think about taking the exam. This is my second career. I am admitted to practice law in the District of Columbia and another state. So I'm familiar with licensure and all of the barriers to entry that exist in various different professions. I'm concerned about this on a personal level because I am over 50 and I see the disparities in pass rates. It's 91% versus 65% for test takers who are over 50. But I'm also really concerned about this issue because I view it as a social justice issue. The racial disparities and the hard of hearing community disparities and the language disparities, those are social justice issues. That's part of the reason I'm getting my MSW, so that I can work on social justice issues and increase people's access to support, care, things they need, services, the people that, as Councilman, sorry, I'm making you a congressman now, that's your next spot. Councilmember White commented, you know, we have a backlog, and my placement this year was in an entity that serves people who are experiencing homelessness. There is a huge backlog, and there are vouchers available and people can't get access to them because there isn't someone literally to put them through the mill. So that's a long introduction, but here's my question. My question is, why are people so afraid of eliminating this exam? The MSW curriculum is very rigorous. You would still have to have a master's in social work from an accredited school. It's not eliminating all barriers or all requirements for licensure. It's eliminating one of the requirements, which has been shown to be eugenicist. Why do we want to be associated as social workers with eugenicists? I definitely don't. I can't imagine any of us really do if you look at it and really think about it that way. But what is everyone so afraid of? You still have to be pass the character and fitness. You still have to have graduated. And by the way, the program is rigorous. I went to law school at Georgetown. This program is harder. The hours that you spend in field, the number of papers you have to write, it's very rigorous. No one's going to graduate. You can't even get, I think you can get 1 C. I haven't gotten a C, thank God, but you're not going to graduate from an accredited program and not understand what you're getting into, what your requirements, what your duties are going to be. So why are people afraid of eliminating this exam? I'll finally stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lydia, for your comment. There were a couple of questions on the chat. One was around, are there specific examples? And the other, there was another questions about the YouTube posting. The host of this event will be sending the link to everyone who have signed up. And so you will be sending the link once it is refined. You will have it if since you're here, you registered for the event. Any other burning questions for the panelists? We have 8 minutes left to this discussion. I will take go ahead, Michael, before I wrap up. Oh, we
Okay,
have
yeah,
one more
I
question.
just wanted, that was a question from Lydia, you know, what people are afraid of. I think it's a really important question because I think fear is a part of this. We've been kind of conditioned over a long time to sort of accept this thing, despite it having no evidence, that this gives us status, this gives us legitimacy. And I think people are afraid that what if we take that away?
I
But I
have a
think,
question.
but I think we, you know, we can look at the facts, and we can also look at our values and say, are we willing to accept this kind of quote unquote legitimacy based on an exam that is discriminating against people for no apparent reason? That's not a standard for competency. And so are we willing to trade the livelihoods and lives of thousands of people for a perceived legitimacy? And I think that's a really important question we need to ask ourselves. We have a chance to do something right now to right a 40-year wrong. And I hope we can take it.
I have a question.
Hang on, Pastor Sandra. We have two people ahead of you in the work. Christine?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I am a social work educator in Connecticut and a member of NASW, and I tutor recent social work graduates for the exam. In the university where I teach, I run an exam prep boot camp, and I don't have any published quantitative data. I have, you know, qualitative stories of students sitting in my office crying about not passing this exam, questioning whether social work is the right field for them. We designed an exam prep boot camp in the spirit of distributive justice, because you know, there's a cost involved with exam prep programs and buying test materials and tutors. So we offer an exam prep boot camp to our students, no cost. I tutor people privately at a very, very reduced rate in the spirit of distributive justice. And I will tell you how I prepare people to take the exam has nothing to do with social work content. It's all about teaching people how to break down and dissect a multiple choice exam. I could teach a carpenter, and no dissing carpenters, with zero social work education, how to break down these questions and pass this exam. So I was active in Connecticut. We just eliminated the exam in Connecticut. I don't know what the ramifications are, how it's all going to play out, but I just wish you all props, and it's like my life mission now to take down this exam. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Pastor Sandra?
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm from the older generation. I would like to say I've been in the field over 30 years. I have not been able to pass the test. I will be honest, I gave up. I took it twice. I missed it the first time, I think 2 points. I went back, 3 and 2. After the second time, I gave up. I was a supervisor at CFSA. I lost my job because I could not pass the test. Now, I want to take you all back, all of you all that's 50 and in the 60s, back when we were grandfathering. The same people that are running DC now are the people that got grandfather. If I would have been in the country, I was out, my husband was military, we retired now, I would have got grandfather and I would be a LICSW today. They all got grandfather. No one said to them or saying today, who what's the word I'm looking for? How are you justified because you were grandfathered in? How are you being measured now that you're LICSW? But in the 80s and the late 90s, when they were doing, before they closed the grandfather, all of them got grandfather. Back then, we could have got grandfather as a LICSW, just with an MSW. So I'm going to, I want to leave it there. And I also want to say, if they're running the district now and with that LICSW in high positions and they never took a test, what's the difference now? Now, and I also want to say, I'm one of them that it will be hard. I'm starting to study again at my age. I'm a couple years, I had retired. I came back to help out.
Thank you, Ms.
I
Moore.
know that's all I got to say. I'm just saying I need someone, the upper management. I thank Mr. White for being here, Councilmember White, because they've all got grandfathered in and they're running DC now. So what's the difference now? That's all I got.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last question will come from Patricia.
Thanks for giving me
And then we're
two,
gonna wrap
Marie.
up. Yes.
This is more a comment, which is we have a brand new DC health director. She comes from the Office of Health Equity in San Francisco, and let's put this on her plate.
Thank you, Patricia. We have a minute left, and I'm going to take that minute to wrap up. Let's give our entire panelists a round of applause. Thank you, Councilman White, for really introducing this legislation to really start the conversation. I am asking everyone who is passionate about this issue, who wants this issue to be implemented. As Councilman White mentioned, please testify at the hearing. Sign up, it's very easy to do, and testify at the hearing and let your voice be heard if you are in support of this legislation. Finally, I wanted to wrap up at a meeting that we were at, and the speaker said that the test is not biased. You just have to teach to the test. And so one of the things I want to say, if that's all it requires, then it doesn't test knowledge. And so I want all of us to really grapple with what is it that we want in our profession? Quality work, knowledgeable people, or just an exam that people teach to the test. So thank you, everyone, thank you to the panelists. Appreciate all of you for taking the time to be here after hours and lengthening your day. Thank you, everyone, for preparing for this discussion. Great job. And thank you, audience, for all of your comments and for asking your questions.
And I'd like to say thank you to Marie Merlis Black for being an amazing facilitator. Thank you so much. It was so good to have you here. And we have one final announcement. If you want CE credit for this, Lisa's going to give you some instructions.
Just very briefly, for those who want CEs, make sure that your name is in the chat with a thumbs up from me. That's how I'm keeping attendance. And within a couple of days, you'll get an evaluation. Once that is sent back, human beings will be sending out certificates. Normally, my events are like 30 people. This is very big, so it may take a little time. If you have not gotten a certificate by July 8th, let us know. We will make sure you get it by the DC renewal period, but it may take a minute. That is it. Thank you all.
Thank you. Great event. Great discussion.
Yeah, so nice to be with you all. Take care.
Great evening, everyone.